Hello and welcome to the latest video in our series on AI in education. What does the research say? I'm Darren Macey, and with me is Dr. Lucy Rycroft-Smith. And today we're delighted to be talking to Dr. Cristina Costa about her work. So, Dr. Costa is an associate professor in the School of Education at Durham University. Her work focuses on the intersections of digital experiences and societal phenomena, including digital well-being and generative AI in education. So, welcome, Cristina, and really thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so we really wanted to talk to Cristina because of two papers we read, which she co-authored that released very recently with Dr. Mark Murphy. The first thing to say is you have excellent titling game.
Oh, thank you. I think that was a bit to Mark, actually.
That was Mark. Okay. So the two papers, and we do love a kind of a colon separated title in papers. So the two papers we were looking at were generative artificial intelligence in education. What, in brackets, are we thinking? And critical education, generative artificial intelligence, and the tyranny of freedom, a critique of modern technocracy. Both right in the sweet spot for Lucy and I think. Particularly in terms of the framing of general AI and the context in terms of critical education, neoliberalism and credentialization. And I am not going to get told off by Lucy by going down a neoliberalism and education rabbit hole.
Not today.
They were really great papers to read. So the first question, I guess, is what is it that you wish teachers knew about generative AI?
I think it's one of the aspects that the kind of the rhetoric that goes around is this time-saving efficiency, and kind of putting aside more time for the important stuff. I don't think this is what's happening, or that as things are deployed more deeply into education, as Gen AI seeps into everything we do, that will happen. So actually, I think it will put more pressure on people to work even more, because we're not looking at the right things right now. If we see this as if we see this as inevitable, which I don't, and I think that's another discussion. But it's we're selling it, or we're being sold Gen AI as something, it's here to stay, and it has to stay, and I think there's a kind of a moment here for us to pause and to think about this more deeply, and implications for education, because it definitely does not have to stay, and we need to assess, if the good that is allegedly doing is counterintuitive, and so there's a lot of things. I think teachers are catching on to that. I'm not so sure, the leadership is. So this is this is another, this is the kind of the juncture of the rhetorics and how where practice does not meet sometimes idealism. I'm not even going to say the theory, because the theory is starting to come in around this. We're becoming more critical about the use of Gen AI and technology in general in education, which is good to see. It's been a battle to get to this point, but I think that's one of the aspects that I think it needs to be raised more, is these time efficiencies, these and what is efficiency as well? Are we becoming more efficient? What is robbing us in terms of humanity, in terms of thinking, in terms of engagement, but also in terms of the purpose of education? Because I think the only thing that I can say is that this kind of creates a great opportunity for us to finally rethink the curriculum crisis, and rethink how we organize education. A lot of emphasis has been put on the assessment, but that's the end side of an educational experience. Well, it does not have to be, but right now it is also based on all the kind of more performative aspects of education. And so we're not really looking at the core, of the problem here. But that's my view.
Thank you. That's really useful. And one of the phrases that I enjoy that you use around the sort of current discourse around Gen AI is this idea of a moral panic, which quite often we hear used in a very derogatory way, as in people are just sort of clutching their pearls and not doing anything. But as you say, one of the points you make, I think, is some of us have a very kind of strong emotional reaction to the idea of technology intruding into our lives in such a wholesale manner, including in education. And so we feel a sense of moral panic. And the question then is, and I would really like to pose this to you, how do we then capitalize on that emotional feeling and move it towards action?
Yeah, I think that's the aspect also of a critical stance, isn't it? Is we kind of define what the issues are, but we need to move forward. We can't just keep on the negative side. We need to move forward to something, to what we can do here. Yeah, and the moral panic is it is not coming so much from education. That's the thing that I've been surprised. Is coming a lot from the arts. You've seen Paul McCartney and a lot of artists launched the White Album or the Empty Album, whatever it's called, some months ago. There has been unions protests in the US around the Artists Guild. But education has been really quiet around that, which is very surprising, I must say. So because the leadership is coming from very top, very high up, OECD, UNESCO, national governments wanting to get on this bandwagon because they see the link, very narrow link with the economy and how we can have a thriving economy. So this is the aspect that has kind of clouds what impact this has to certain activities, and especially education, but society at large as well. So there's a lot of issues here that need to be tackled. And that moral panic, as you say, maybe we could have a bit more of that in education. I think one of the reasons why we're not having that much, and why leaders, at all educational strands, and this is just kind of my view, probably have kind of start saying, we need to endorse this, is because of all the backlash and criticism that came from the pandemic, where we realized we definitely were not ready after, all this time thinking about technology. We were not ready to move education into a digital scenario for necessity. And so, let's not be badged again as someone that lags behind, and let's put this at the forefront. But without the thinking, without kind of also engaging the key stakeholders, which are teachers, are the educators, but also students, that becomes quite hard then to even people try to understand, what's happening here, and how are we going to use it? Because one of the things that I'm very puzzled as well is all of this kind of frenzy around we now all have to be AI literate. And I have no idea what that means, because it means just to kind of type something into the engine and get it back. Obviously, I understand that it means, understand what the machine is doing behind it and all of that. But if we go that way, then it becomes very clearly, very fast, that it's not ethical, because of the way these machines have been trained, the way the lack of transparency, all of those aspects. So what are we advocating here? So these are things for me that are very important. And I would say if there was to be a moral panic that would ignite action, is really now how do we create an educational system that has meaning for people? Because I think one of the things Axel Honneth says in his last book, that people have a deep-seated need to find meaning in everything they do. And I think these younger generations, I'm a bit older, these younger generations want that at a much forefront than probably older generations, even older than me. We kind of worked through it to see if there was what was the meaning. I think people now demand, and rightly so, demand that we whatever they do have more meaning at this stage. And I think this is the crisis that could ignite the kind of the reorganization of learning, of teaching and learning, because timed periods, we don't learn in 50 minutes or whatever time periods we have. That's very kind of old-fashioned. It worked for a certain society. I don't think it works for this society. I think we need to be engaged differently, which also then means time is seen differently. So this advocation for time efficiencies doesn't really work anymore in that way. And so we have to make time for thinking. We need to make time to engage people differently so that they don't feel disenfranchised from the system, but also that we don't go, not necessarily then inadvertently support this idea that education, especially as you move on to prepare yourself for higher education, is not necessarily needed in this society. And more, I think we need to engage in higher forms of thinking, so that we can be nicer to each other, we can appreciate what we have, and how we can create a better society. And that requires a kind of an engaged mind, and yielding these to the machines, as I call it, it's dangerous, and probably not what we want to do. Especially in the times that we are living, kind of infocratic times, as Han calls it. So it's something that I think it's, I would like to see a bit more moral panic. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, infocratic's a lovely word.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting that came out of your paper, and you touched upon it there a little bit, was this idea that the act of thinking, which you discuss in quite a lot of detail, is slow and it takes time, and that's an important aspect of thinking, and that there is a real tension there with some of the values that we're developing in society around the ideas of efficiency and speed, and also that are then supported by the arguments around AI, that it's all about speed and efficiency and access, quick access and things. And I wonder if that's something you talk a little bit more to, because this idea of thinking is so kind of apposite when we're talking about generative AI, which gets claimed is thinking in some sense, probably definitely erroneously, but that counterpoint between what a person is doing when they're thinking and AI thinking.
Yeah, so I think this came from the work of Hannah Arendt, and I find it very provocative in the context of Gen I, because one of the things that she says, and I think it takes a minute. It took me wow, it kind of hit me in the face when I was reading this, and and it takes a minute to appreciate this, but then also to realize how true that is, because what she says is that thinking does not have a productive element. So thinking is not productive at all. And I think it takes a minute for you to appreciate that, because you're thinking, so I'm thinking and I'm not doing anything. We're doing something, but not necessarily as a productive outcome. So we can spend the entire day thinking, and that's one of the things, especially, if we think about academics, think, they're there massaging their brains, they're thinking, but what are they doing? But the thinking is so important, because it kind of allows you to ponder about stuff, to also realize where you stand on stuff. And that is something that no one can do for you. But it might not yield anything. That is counteractive to the education systems that we have these days, because actually we have, in a way, overlooked the process many times, because we're always focusing at the end result. So that is one of the things that AI has in its advantage in relation to the systems that we have. And that's why I'm saying you need to think about the systems if we're going to counteract the effects of AI. And especially Gen I. So thinking in that sense is something that produces reflection, but it might not create any action. It might not create anything concrete, but it's essential for the human mind. Interrelated with thinking, however, is the act of understanding. So you need to think to be able to understand something. And understanding is also very personal, because one of the things that, when we, and it has been usually criticized, the idea of more kind of didactic ways of teaching, where, we just present information and we expect everyone else to just acquire it in that way. And then, so it becomes a kind of a meaningless activity, because people might be able to reproduce that, but not necessarily know what they're saying. And that is because we're kind of moving on the understanding without curtailing and cutting out the thinking aspect to it. So these are interrelated aspects, is that obviously understanding cannot happen without thinking, but thinking on its own is not necessarily productive. And so this is, for me, is very interesting, because once you put something in the system that we have, where you are going to be prepared to answer a given question that you're asked in an exam, you can put that into Gen AI and any Gen AI engine, and it comes back with an answer, regardless if it's going to be accurate or not at this point, and it's becoming much sharper. Is you are now in the possession of a product, of a kind of, at least a form of understanding. If it's an accurate or not, it's, you can make it pass as your own. But you haven't had the chance, or haven't given yourself the chance to think about it necessarily, to create that. So there's a disjuncture here between the two aspects. And the other aspect here that I think it's important to consider as well is that this is seductive, because thinking is hard and but necessary. And so these are the aspects when you are you are being judged just on that product, when you're also stressed, because it does create stress. I was telling this to my students this week as I was doing induction. I hope you find this a bit hard. It sounds like I'm a bit of a taskmaster, but because if it doesn't, then it's probably because it wasn't for you. Because to be able to learn, to grow, we need to go to these struggles, and they can be unsettling, and I do recognize that, and maybe that's why we need to have more support structures in place. But going through a learning experience that hasn't created a dilemma, that has not created some kind of doubt or some kind of struggle in terms of how you reorganize your thinking, how do you kind of collect yourself in terms of the values that you have, how you reshape your values, then that's not an educational experience. But we're just kind of targeting success. We're not targeting the struggles that lead to success. And so it's very, I find that Gen I, because of the way education is organized right now, creates a very desirable, easy way to pass that success test. And so it goes against everything that is important for the human experience of us growing intellectually. And that for me is quite dangerous and quite, it's something that I find that is not going to improve society, is not going to work in our best interests, even though, there's a kind of a relief when we can provide this at such a low cost to our well-being, because sometimes not understanding something makes us feel low, and compound with other issues that are going in people's lives. I can understand that this can become quite a nice way to alleviate that, but in the long run is not alleviating anything. And what might do is then that we are going to be more open to certain narratives that are not necessarily the best narratives, and I'm thinking about here, again, that more infographic information regime type of approach that might commodify what we're kind of doing in ways that might make the swing to less just experiences, to a less just society. And so I'm very I find that for me was a lens to explain and to understand what it does to the thinking process, and how probably it's time for us to start thinking about how that can be put back into education, and that requires a slower pace. It requires more engagement with students, with learners, as citizens, also respecting that. As we're doing a lot of work right now, also starting with we're going to start with Gen I soon, but we've been doing a lot of work around digital engagement with young people, and also that kind of giving them the responsibility is an honor. It's something that we need to be more open to do. That is to give people more responsibility in taking ownership for their own thinking, rather than just say, this is the right way of thinking. I think we need to guide them into kind of frames of where we stand as a society, and that should always, I think that's where I don't really negotiate, is always around a much fairer, just society. But how do we guide people to engage in that way, so that they can then take ownership of their thinking, rather than to let a machine tell them. Just one more thing before I shut up, but the other aspect that I think, and I've been telling this to colleagues, is we need to start developing an appreciation for less polished writing. Because I am I must say I love good writing. And again, that takes a lot of thinking, takes a lot of rewriting, takes a lot of pain in going back to something that you thought, was okay, and then you come back and read it again. So there's a lot of work and a lot of time involved in that. And that's something that AI can do very well. It can polish writing. It doesn't mean that the meaning of that writing is necessarily the soundest, but it's very polished. And so that's one of the things now, to engage with genuine writing, and especially when people are stressed and that limited time to do that. Like the papers that you've been mentioning, they have gone through so many iterations. I can't tell you. So that's something that we need to start kind of appreciating the imperfections of thinking, of writing, so that we can get better at it, because we're not machines. And I think that's something that is very important.
Yeah, and that comes across really strongly in your writing, that perhaps, and I'd be interested on your take on this, perhaps that Gen AI isn't in itself the cause, the root of problems, but it's a symptom of something that started factoring a while ago in education, which is that we started to favour the production, the outcome, and take shortcuts, and therefore the pressure on teachers to efficiently produce young people who pass exams, started a long time ago. I wonder if you sort of speak to where are the roots of that historically for you?
Well, those roots kind of, they creep in with the massification of education, and the kind of which ways do we have to create hierarchies in terms of not just class assessments. I'm not an historian, so, but it also then, you see in the last few decades also schools being rated. You see then PISA assessments creating further pressure. There's an hour for the pressure, in 2029, there will be a new assessment from PISA to include AI literacy, which I think, again, is going to add more pressure for schools it creates the right conditions for schools to implement this, without necessarily taking into account and taking stock of the consequences. So there's a lot of pressures, a lot of external pressures, also the inspectorates and all that look at, where schools are in terms of scores. that makes also, I think this is one of the issues as well, because it makes the teaching profession less meaningful, because you then all of a sudden have less time to focus on what's important, which is your engagement with your students, and how you kind of cultivate their intellectual growth. So all these kind of the target the eye on it's kind of eyeing the kind of that target where schools need to be to kind of it's kind of deterring from that the more noble goal of education, which is really how do we kind of create rounded people or help create rounded people. Education is not the only institution that does that, but it's one of the key ones for the kind of the intellectualization of ideas and all that has been lost as well, because a lot of even if we go back, because this is all entangled, isn't it? It kind of the type of research that is being valued is all about what works. So we kind of creating fixes, so if there's something here, let's fix that. But actually, if we put the finger on the problem, we'll see that is stemming from something else. It's not just stemming from one of the aspects that I always tell students is if we give children breakfast, they will learn better. Well, it's right. It's totally anyone should have breakfast. But why aren't children having breakfast? That's not an educational problem. That's something bigger. But we can create these fixes for education. So there will be schools that will provide breakfast for children, which obviously no child should go without breakfast. But it's those things that we're in as globally, the kind of the entire system needs to be revised in a more complex way to understand how we can cater for a different education system. And this is a big issue because it's a huge, undertaking to do something like that. But I think we should start piloting at least some of these aspects of how, obviously there are some different types of schools, but for the mainstream schools, which is what I'm more important on, is, the school that, people, the average person will come to, the state schools that are organized in very kind of strict ways, in very disciplinary ways. That's the other thing that G&I also, for me, comes to break is, do we still need to work in such disciplinary ways? Do we need to be more interdisciplinary in the way that we learn to understand the complexities of society? So that requires some daring from the people above as well, in trying to kind of create something that might be more inclusive. Because I think the other aspect that we haven't touched upon, and I haven't touched upon so much in the papers, that's another paper surely, but it's how this is going to create more divides in society as well, because then it comes down to pressures in schools, also student teacher ratios, in how we kind of scaffold these skills, how we kind of engage more with thinking processes rather than just AI. We might see in the future with, especially in countries like the UK, where teacher retention is a kind of an issue right now, how some schools might default to using AI more often and in ways that we probably haven't even anticipated yet, to kind of cover for that shortfall of people on the ground. So there's all these kind of issues that need to be thought of for in terms of what's happening in the future, but also thinking about what is happening now. So there's also a lot of the literature talks about this idea of pedagogies of indifference, and that indifference comes from both sides, because that's what happens as well, and I'm not pointing fingers here at anyone, but as people work within the systems, and it gets to a point that we're just working to get through it, and so then students also become aware of the game. The game is to get the scores, is to get, and you can't blame them if they think, it doesn't matter how much I kind of take time in thinking. If I'm not going to get that score, I'm not going to get to where I want to be. So there's kind of that gamifying of that aspect. And then, there's also a bit kind of becomes also solace from the other side as well, that, okay, you have the score, what can we do? So these are things that the system then creates, and it's very hard to fight off because the structures become so strong. So anyway, these are some views that I have. I'm not sure everyone will agree with them, but
yeah, I think it's a huge conversation, so it goes way beyond just the AI side to what is education for, and who's it for, and who does it serve, and things. And I think the thing that really stands out in how you're talking about what comes across in your papers. There was the focus in the papers you mentioned already. Hannah Arendt, bell hooks is referenced in your papers. Critical education, Paulo Freire. Those kind of ideas come from a very particular perspective on education. I think a perspective that both Lucy and I also share around what education is for and what education can do for people. But there is, I guess, a risk of having a very polarized debate when it comes to AI, because if you are encultured in the kind of credentialized system of education where it's about performativeness, it's about getting kids through the assessment, it's about achieving those goals and those milestones, it's quite hard to have a conversation about the value of AI, because how you're judging that value is so diametrically different in some ways. I wonder if you have any thoughts on how people that take our perspective on education can talk to people who are encultured within that kind of performative education system and very invested in it for different reasons, depending on what their role is.
Yeah, I think, people, it's a tough question. People always talk about polarized because we're, doing a more kind of critical stance. I don't see this as it's a critique of what is there, and I think it's important for people to also listen. One of the things that we say in the papers is, if it's here, if it's doomed to the point that we cannot get rid of it, we need to work with it, and to work with it is then to create a different way of engagement with education at all levels. I find that people that I think they're also realizing that some of these things then become quite too much performative as well. So there's but there's still probably a lot of people from leadership or computer science. I always say this is a huge win and advancement for computer science. For education and society, not so much. So there are things here that again is amazing what has been achieved technically, but how that kind of then marries up to what we need as human beings is different. I think there has to be an appreciation for that, so that there's have to be a kind of a bit of a give and take. So and I think these also have to be step changes, isn't it? That people, the way we organize education. But one of the things that technology that seeps into education has been a bit devoid of that pedagogical perspective, of a kind of a pedagogical perspective of engagement, rather than this idea of human-computer interaction, which again is just answer input output type of aspect. I know that is becoming more deliberative, but I think we need to, and again for me this is we also at the research level we need to work more interdisciplinary, because otherwise we're only just casting one view. So and I've been trying to kind of work with people in that sense, so that we can prepare people in that way. So I don't really have a kind of a key answer for that now, but I think there has to be a dialogue. Maybe we need to bring each other to the table and to understand people's views, because again, I'm not saying that this is not an amazing thing. Technologically, computer science aspect is great, but there are huge implications here that it might actually override all this performative education. Actually, instead of helping it, they might say, actually, we don't need it anymore because we can now have this. So you can really override something in a way that people thought is just going to support it. But actually, if that's the way it's going, we no longer need it. And I think I think someone said the other day that schools will still be needed because we need childcare. I think that's a very poor way to think about education. So I think, again, we need to really reconsider this. Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it because of the consequences. And I think here we need to get those perspectives so that the technology perspective does not overpower everything, and there has to be an appreciation for that as well from that side. So if we have to deal with it, then I think we also need to negotiate the terms of that engagement. And right now, that's not happening because there's a lot of economic interest in that that comes from an understanding that if we're going to thrive economically, we need to be the most advanced AI users and producers in the world, and I think that is deterring from other aspects. So I'm not sure if I answered that, but
it's very, very interesting. Thank you. And so one thing that I hear coming through in your writing and in your speaking is this tension between the rhetoric, which is technology promising freedom, and what's actually happening for teachers and students, which is actually more constraint, more narrowing in a number of ways. Would you say that's true for you?
Yes. And I worked with I was reading the work of Paulo Freire, some work that he left undeveloped around this idea of the tyranny of freedom, and how, we always think that freedom is very liberating and, and easier to free us. But there are certain liberties that, we can take with Gen AI that are going to trap us into that. Because, I always say, thinking is a bit like running a marathon. You don't show up on the day to run and thinking that you're not going to be hurt, that you're going to finish, that you're going to finish in a good timing, even if you are so strong that you could finish it. It takes months for athletes, takes years to have that preparation. There's a lot of conditioning. There's a lot of people supporting you and helping you achieve the state where you can run a marathon. The same thing is with thinking. So if we're defaulting that to Gen AI, it's going to get to a point that we might not feel comfortable doing any writing, any thinking without that crutch. Anna Arendt also talks about crutches, which I did not really include in the papers, but it becomes a kind of a crutch. And then so you all of a sudden you are so dependent on that it's no longer liberating. You become kind of imprisoned in it. So there's this aspect that I think people are not realizing, because I'm like, now I can polish my paper in a day or something like that, because I can just have AI kind of write the sentence better, and sometimes does come up with a structured sentence that you think, okay, that's much better than what I had here.
Yeah.
And so so it keeps going because it gets a bit addictive, and we are a bit addictive to technology right now. I was abroad a couple of weeks ago, and for some reason, my roaming couldn't activate. So, all of a sudden I don't have Google Maps to where I'm going. And so little things like that you think, okay, and you're always kind of reaching for it, because that's the way, it's become habitual. It's become more than something that you do. It's become part of, is almost embodied in what you do. And Gen I can become that. So there's aspects here of where we think, oh, this is so freeing. It's freeing time. It's freeing my head space. But there are very, very big dangers to freeing headspace, because then you're not going to be trained to how to think. And there's a training to, like, that's why there's stepping stones as well in terms of how we engage with thinking, with ideas. And I think that's the other aspect here that, if you want to go even a bit further, I think there has been a kind of a crisis and a decay of the importance of ideas. More often than not, because of people, not wanting to engage with what we call theory. And I think theory has become quite scary for people, because it's big thoughts and it's words acquiring meaning that go beyond the meaning that we would use it on a day-to-day basis. And so that kind of, it seems to have become fashionable that, people saying, I don't do theory, because the theory is complex, or is out. I want to have my own ideas. But actually, these are ideas. If we translate theory as ideas, ideas have created democracy. For example, I always say that without theory, there wouldn't have been democracy. It wouldn't be the world as imperfect as it is today. There wouldn't have been that we had this system where people can be free. but that freedom is relative, and I think it also stems, we didn't go so much into that, but stems from this idea that I'm free to say what I want, I'm free to do whatever I want. But freedom is relative, and Paulo Freire is very, very adamant on that freedom without principles becomes unfree, becomes, you started to impinge on someone else's freedom. And here Gen I is impinging, potentially on our freedom to think for ourselves, which might mean that is not thinking what the machine is programmed to come back with. Right now, things are still leaning a bit more kind of, in a diverse way from what I understand. But as more Gen I systems start to emerge with very vested interests of what target audiences they should serve, that will change, because it's a programming. It's not like that machine thinks exactly for itself. It thinks whatever the engineers have set to them to think. So there's things here that are important to understand, and that we don't give our freedom away, because that was always, I come from a country that went through a very long period of fascism, of controlling people's minds. Unfortunately, I was born just after it, but you still felt a lot of the kind of the repercussions of that thinking, because thinking doesn't change necessarily. People's ways of thinking get very ingrained and very embodied. And but one of the things that I always remember people saying is that they could imprison us, but they couldn't take our thinking away. That, and I'm scared that Gen I might try. And it's not Gen I again. It's how we also let ourselves be involved into these systems. And again, it has to do with how seductive it is, how easy it is. Because of all the other pressures that we have in our lives and what we have to prove. That might not allow us to think. So I think there has to be a restore of how we engage with ideas. If we don't want to call it theory anymore because it's a bad word, maybe we call it something else. But it's important that we have big thoughts and that we kind of engage other people in thinking for themselves as well, so that other ideas can also emerge. Because I think one of the aspects with theory is saying, this was produced 70 years ago, but the principles that is important, not necessarily when it was developed. If they're still valid, if still. Sorry.
No. So I think one of the things I should say about your papers are they are eminently quotable. And there is a great deal of things within them that I have bookmarked for use as citations in various things. But I just wanted to having listened to you talking there, one of the really nice turns of phrase I just want to read out from the paper, because I think it captures something of what you said there. Was you said, yet such a gift comes at a price, talking about generative AI. The result is not intellectual liberation, but it may well develop into a form of technological codependence that supports the domestication of the mind. And I really enjoyed that sort of that phrase of the domestication of the mind. It really gets at kind of something of what you were just talking about there. So I guess one big question then for the teacher watching this, the primary school teacher, the secondary school teacher watching this, with all of this stuff and operating within this system, as we've talked about, and the various pressures and incentives, is there anything that you would suggest or argue that teachers could do or should be doing at this time, where perhaps there are lots of people encouraging them to experiment with generative AI, use it in their lessons? They know their students are experimenting. And what do you have any advice or any suggestions of what teachers should be doing at the moment?
I think maybe some of them are already, but I think it's important to understand these, the kind of the consequences and the mechanisms also as well of Gen AI, rather than just it's another lovely tool that does this for us, and I think it's also important. One of the things that I think it's important to do, and we're going to do that with some of my own students as well, is to create the principles. So have shared principles of the use of AI, and that kind of triggers a discussion of the values and understanding, where people want to be, how they want to be positioned within these aspects. There might be something around also school leadership, of how that's done with all teachers for a given school. What are the principles of if you set the set of principles of engagement with Gen AI, what we endorse, what we don't, what in terms of the values, what is the ethos around that? I think that's where then you can start discussions, and then from there you can start to kind of also thinking about how do we develop curriculum, because that's the paper that I'm working on right now, very slowly, because that requires a lot of thinking. But to think about how do we reorganize curriculum? Again, it's another area of practice that I think has gone a bit out of fashion. A lot of the good ideas that I've been reading about kind of seem to stop in the 90s. That's my perspective. So there's a lot of, I think, a lot of work to be done around how do we create new curriculum? How do we create new ways of engaging? And I think that's something that teachers can start to think. But first, if they establish their values, the values that they attach to their to how they see themselves using Gen AI, but also negotiate that with young people. And I think it doesn't matter how young they are; they're starting to kind of, the more you raise that awareness, I think the better. The earlier you do it, the better. So I think there's obviously they need to be targeted to that audience, but to start thinking about these things. I know that Sonia Livingstone has done a lot of work with Gen AI and younger people just now as well. So there's opportunities here to think about. But I would start with the principles. How do where do you stand in terms of Gen AI? Kind of create common ground between maybe the team of teachers, but also with your classroom. And then we can go from there, I think.
Thank you. And one of the things that I really enjoy about your papers is there's a lot of, as you say, ideas of panic, doom around discussions of AI, and lots of extreme thinking. And one thing that you frame so beautifully is absolutely that thought that, all right, we are in a time of crisis, but that could and should prompt a reorganization of how we think about curriculum, how we think about education. And rather than responding to AI in a way that's unhelpful and unproductive, what we could do is take it as an opportunity. And I think, that's something that I really appreciate about the way that you've written about this. And so, thank you for that perspective, which helps to bring some balance, I think, to those of us who feel perhaps that we are attempting to resist something that feels very overwhelming and very powerful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think, we always have to. I come from a very Paulo Freire tradition, and he always says we need to denounce the conditions under which we're in, but we also need to announce the new order. And I think many times we are very good at denouncing, but not very good at announcing, and also because there's such there's so many forces in favor of it that I although, like I said at the beginning, I don't think this is inevitable, but it becomes quite hard to fight it off. So, and I'm not saying that we should join them, but we should meet them at some point and negotiate also where we're coming from. And I think the way to resist or to make the best of this would be to really, if at the end of the day we could get a new educational system that is more inclusive, that is more vibrant, where people can, engage more than they are now, then that's a win for me.
That, I think, works for all of us well. That feels like a really good place to bring this conversation to a close on a note of optimism, I think, for what's possible in the future. Thank you so much for talking to us, Cristina. This has been really fantastic, really interesting conversation. For those people watching, and if you've enjoyed today's conversation, please do subscribe to the channel. Share it on social media. Let's get as many teachers as possible engaging in these ideas and engaging the work of interesting writers like Cristina and Mark Murphy, who co-authored the papers with her. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments underneath the video, and also any suggestions for other people that we should talk to in the future. But for now, thank you so much again for joining us, Cristina. We've really enjoyed it. We really appreciate it. And all that remains to say from Lucy and me is thanks for watching and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.